Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Metaphysical Egypt. I'm Alan Peoples with Patricia Awion-Lehman, and today we have a special guest, Timothy Hogan. Hi, Tim.
Hi, thanks for having me. You want me to give a little background of myself here?
Yes, please, for our audience who don't know who you are.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Timothy Hogan. I'm the current Grand Master of the Knights Templar of the Order of the Temple of Secret Initiates Lineage, and I run the Templar Collegiate in conjunction with it. I'm also an author of several books, and I'm the host of Mysteries of the Knights Templar on Gaia. So that's general, about as general as we could get. That's my background.
It's very general. I have to add, that Tim has been out lecturing at conferences all over the United States. And so many of my friends have been contacting me. Tim and I, by the way, everyone, are about to work together on we're going to co-host a tour together in February. And I'm so excited. I've never worked with Tim before. And I think Alan and I wanted to have this podcast so we could get to know you better. But I've been hearing all these amazing things. My friends are writing to me. Some of them didn't even know that I knew you, and then we've been talking about this tour and saying, that you were their favorite speaker, or, they were telling me about people that we've worked with, my friends and I, in the past, and that you were like, wow, he just knows so much, and he reminds me of so and so. So it was really exciting to hear that. And of course, I told you I picked up one of your books, and what Alan and I, and I've watched some of the podcast, of course, and you're on Gaia television now, and there's so many exciting things going on in your life, and I'm seeing your name everywhere. But what Alan and I have been discussing recently is how much what you say is exactly what we've been talking about, and I've been talking about for years. So it's kind of exciting how much in sync we are with a lot of the things that we talk about and know. But you
Well,
have
I have to admit. Oh, thank you. I was just going to say, I have to admit, a lot of what I know, I just inherited from the tradition, that had been being passed down within my order for, centuries. But I, in some stuff, I feel like I've come up to of my own understanding and been able to develop it further. But what's really exciting is being able to get with you, Patricia, because you have a whole other line of tradition that you've gained and you're passing on, and it all jives really well, and as it should. But it's very exciting, and so I'm learning, just as much from you. So it's great.
Well, thank you. And that is part of why we do these tours and bring people together. And the fact that we haven't worked together is very exciting for me, because when you're out at the sites and you're comparing and sharing, you tend to find so much more information, because the two of you are looking at it, from maybe, and sometimes there's more, but you're looking at it from different ways and angles, and suddenly everything starts to speak more loudly and more clearly, and you see so much more. And that I think is going to be the most exciting part about this, that you will bring so much depth of knowledge of things that I'm not aware of, from your tradition. And as you said, I have so much that, I've been in Egypt going on 16 years in November.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's a long time to be going through these temples and reading and studying and researching. So yeah, it's going to be fun. But let's get started today. I did prepare. We talked about that we wanted to just talk about maybe Osiris and Isis and this whole dynamic that is such a huge part of the heritage of Egypt. So I created some slides for us to just kind of go through, hopefully in some kind of order. Let me pull them up. Egypt Unveiled, and February 15th to the 27th of next year, which I think is one of the best times of the year to come to Egypt. The weather is absolutely beautiful, and it's a little cooler. It could be a little cooler at night, but if you were here right now in the middle of summer, you'd be happy to be there when it's a little cooler. So let's get started. I brought this up from Dendera. It's the ceiling of the first hypostyle hall as you walk in the entrance, and it shows us Osiris and Sophis as Isis and Sirius in a way, and this is Osiris as Sa and Orion. So the story is, it's written in the stars and mirrored on Earth. And Tim, yeah, please go ahead and jump in with anything you want to say at any time.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's always that celestial relationship that's also reflected, on the ground in Egypt itself between Osiris and Isis. Of course, Osiris was depicted by Orion, the constellation of Orion, and oftentimes you'll see depictions of pharaohs with their triangular aprons on, and that triangular apron is actually, it's mimicking the shape of the star constellation of Orion itself. So, they're reflecting what's above, bringing it down below. That as above, so below type of relationship. You find that in the monuments. You find that in how the pharaohs are depicted. And the other thing I would say too about that is, most people don't know. So in ancient Egyptian, Osiris's name is actually Osar, and it's only it was the later Greeks that made it Osiris, but the correct name is Asar. But the first part of Asar is actually the As part is actually associated with Isis, which was just meant throne or seat, and that's where Osiris got his power from, was from his sister wife Isis. And so the first part to the As part was associated with Isis, and then the Sar part was associated with the actual male deity of Osiris. But that was his complete name, and a lot of that had to do with the mythologies surrounding Isis and Osiris.
Yeah, I just brought up the slide I had that has Isis with the throne on her head. She was known as the Per-Ah, which is where we get the word pharaoh. It was the high house because of the lineage went through the female bloodline. And that's why so many of the pharaohs married their mothers, their sisters, their cousins, or what have you, because they had to marry into the feminine bloodline.
And you can actually see the word Osiris just to the left of her head. You see the throne and the eye. Those two glyphs together make the name of Osiris.
Right.
But I wanted to bring this up since we're talking about Isis and Osiris. The whole story of them and their twin, the twin sister and brother of Nebhet and Set. And of course they get, the Horus is introduced. And that these 5 netters represent, the 5 extra days from a 360-day year, called epigenemal days, actually, which I think is quite interesting because it also brings that, that aspect of, the Earth itself falling off its axis, and us they are responsible for the 4 seasons and the whole agricultural process, and all these different aspects of what they represent in the mythologies.
Yeah, Nidaru is for those who don't know, that's actually the origin of the word nature as well, because it had to do with they alluded to forces in nature, not just anthropomorphic beings.
Absolutely.
There was they related to a lot of different things actually in Egypt, but that was one of them. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So many different things, but yeah, and that's what's interesting in Egypt because we find, and Hakeem did mention this, that every glyph, every symbol, every myth, an icon has at least 7 levels of meaning, and that's really fascinating. We can be at our root chakra level and take everything at face value, but as we open our senses, this is where we begin to see what's happening, really happening, maybe in the space in between, in all the different levels.
And it seems like that understanding is exponential as you move up to the next level.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not simply rungs on a ladder, but rather
Interdimensional. It's not one directional, it's interdimensional, which is fascinating.
Yeah. One of the things I find fascinating from a cosmic standpoint is, Osiris is associated with Orion, and cosmologists have actually determined that our Milky Way solar system actually came out of our Milky Way galaxy, actually came out of Orion at one point in time in antiquity. So
I've heard that as well, yeah.
Yeah, so we're kind of like an extension of that constellation. And
does this have to do with the trapezium? Is that it?
No, just like we literally as a galaxy, we're extension of the Orion galaxy. And in the myth.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, in the myths of Osiris, he's tricked by his brother Set, and he's chopped up in pieces, which are separated in different places. And what Isis does is she comes and she recollects those pieces, and she brings them back to life again. She has to collect them all first. And in a sense, we're almost like a piece of Osiris, or we're a piece of just our galaxy itself is a piece of the Orion galaxy, that had come out at one point in time. And,
well, that's an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah.
I've also heard that we may have come out of the Orion Nebula, which
that's the trapezium that I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, the trapezium, correct, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Which, it's interesting because that is, at the end of the sword that's worn in the belt that you see on so many statues, not only in Egypt, but in Mesopotamia. I've seen it in Turkey, different places in the world.
Yeah.
So I was pointing out where that image was on the Dendera zodiac, and I always like to point out that when Orion, or even Osiris, and Hakeem even went further and said Wazir was the really ancient name, and possibly where we get our word wizard. But when he takes that first step away from Horus and away from Sothis, he is basically taking a 23.5 degree angle step out of balance. And the Dendera zodiac is, 36 decans with 360 days of a perfect year, but it's spiraling out into what we're experiencing today from the center.
Yeah. I like how you have the Fool there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he is the Fool in the major arcana of the tarot deck. Yeah. He is the one that takes that first step, and he says, "Hey, I'm ready for this."
Right.
And it's that first step out of balance so that we can all go on the hero's journey.
Yeah. Well, right, as we've pointed out before, this is the fractal pattern of all of our lives. We all go on the same hero's journey. We are all that fool when we take our first step.
Exactly, which is what Tim just said. We are all Osiris. He's the land, he's the people, and he's the earth itself. Even three-dimensional perception itself.
Right.
And here he is, the tree. And you had mentioned some of the pictures from the Osiris chapels on the second floor at Dendera.
Yeah.
This is since they've cleaned it, and look how beautiful that image is on the
That's
left.
beautiful. Yeah, there was one of the ways to look at it is from an alchemical standpoint, and of course, alchemy comes from Al-Khem. Khem or Khemit was Egypt. It was the science of Egypt, but you know, as Osiris is painted green, he's really the origin of the green man, which you find throughout Europe in cathedrals and such. But in part of his process, of course, he gets chopped up, and then he grows into this tamarisk tree, and Isis is able to partially bring him back after he's been in this tree, and it's really suggestive of, from a alchemical standpoint, there's a belief that there's these secret salts that can be extracted out of the tamarisk tree, and so, but you have to go through this, and the alchemical process is the same whether you're extracting the secret salts or whether you're extracting acids or whatever. It just depends on the plant matter that you're working on. But all alchemical processes involve three main steps, and the first is digestion, where the herb is thrown into a liquid to allow the oils to kind of leach out of the plant into the solution, so you can capture those oils. The second stage is a distillation, where that liquid is heated up and turned into a steam, and then it's captured at usually the higher point of the vessel, where you can get the subtle essences from it. And then the third stage is a calcination, where the body's burned down, and then the salts are extracted. And once you do these three processes, you can then recollect the salts, the oils, and the whatever the subtle essence was that you're getting out of it, and recombine them and raise the thing back to life as a new body. And this is what we find in the story of Osiris, where he's thrown into the Nile. He's chopped up. He's thrown into the Nile, which is digestion. Isis turns herself into a bird and flies around him, which is, the bird is always a depiction of the distillation, because that was it flies to the highest point of the vessel, and then finally she lights incense and oil lamps and such, and raises them back to life. And this was the fire, the calcination stage of it. So we find in the myth of Osiris, as Isis raises Osiris, these stages, and if we do this with tamarisk, we can extract certain medicines out of it. If we do it, there's other plants that grow in Egypt, like, for example, there's a plant, its scientific name is Dictypetalum, and it's depicted on some of the temple walls. But if you do the same process to that, you're able to extract out hydrofluoric acid, which eats granite. And so you can actually etch granite, because it eats away at the silica and the granite. And the only thing that stops it is beeswax and gold. So, for a long time, Egyptologists were trying to figure out why they were coming across certain monuments and stuff that were coated in beeswax, and they couldn't figure out why that was. And it's because you can actually cut out of the beeswax what you want burned out on the granite, and create a template that etch the granite with the hydrofluoric acid using this process. And so and then you just remove the beeswax, and you have a perfectly etched granite, and this was some of those alchemical processes that the Egyptians were using. But it's alluded to in the story of Osiris, and it's not to say that this is the only meaning behind the story of Osiris, but it's certainly one of them. And when you see him depicted in this plant state, that's really, you know, what it's getting to, you know, is this idea of, you know, the what's the seed in nature that makes it fertile and growing and everything else, and how can you extract that out of it? So
yeah, no, that was a beautiful explanation, not only of the plant aspect. I have heard that they used plants in some way with the etching, and you know, some of the things that, you know, so many talk about tool marks, which my feeling is they were always harnessing the forces of nature.
yeah.
They didn't use machinery. They were, you know, they were so in sync with nature's cycles. But I loved your explanation of that. Best explanation I've heard of how they did those, you know, there's some beautiful etchings on the monuments.
Yeah. The two main ones that you find in Egypt, of course, are the tamarisk, and which grows, you know, in the desert area, but then also the acacia.
Acacia.
And acacia, and you find acacia all over in the Bible too, but it's and it's you find it emphasized in Freemasonry, but it's because the secret salts that you can extract out of acacia, there's two salts you can extract out. One is a monoatomic gold, which acacia leaches up and tends to hold a lot of, and then the second is DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which is also found in certain forms of acacia. And so if you extract that out, and you know, you were to ingest that or smoke that, as long as you had a inhibitor like Syrian rue, which grows in the region, you know, you're going to have one hell of a psychedelic experience, you know, which I'm assuming,
Wow. Well, that's exactly the same.
You know, the Egyptians probably played with too.
Well, that's just like ayahuasca, a combination of two plants in a very specific
right.
way.
Same thing. Yeah, same thing. Yep, exactly. Same
opinion,
thing. Yeah.
You know, this all stems from a time that we were in right-brained consciousness and able to communicate with the plants, and the plants told us exactly how to create these, you know, these wonderful elixirs.
Yeah.
That's what ayahuasca shamans say. The plants told them how to do it.
Makes sense to
me. Well, it's interesting too. You know, the Bible makes reference to like the Ark of the Covenant, and it is made out of gold and acacia wood. But all over the temples of Egypt, they have depicted these arks as well. Yes. And you know, so you know, I would assume they were made the same way. I mean, I think that's where probably the Hebrews got it from. So
that's what Allan and we've been talking about on many of our podcasts. This whole concept of the Ark of the Covenant, stemming from, again, many different levels of understanding and depths of knowing.
Yeah.
And yeah, there were many arcs and many different concepts of what that ark was. You know, at one point they show it as being Hathor, like the womb itself.
Yeah.
But also in the barks and the Neshmet, but in so, you know, there's just so many ways of understanding the whole concept of the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah, my favorite at the Temple of Hathor, Dendera, is when you're going up the stairs, you can see them. You can see them carrying an ark up the stairs.
Yep, the procession.
And they're looking at it as they're carrying it up, and then on the downstairs, you see them also carrying it downstairs, but their feet are pointed down, but their heads are looking back at the ark itself that they're carrying. You know?
And do you notice those stairs when you're going up? You're spiraling up. So the whole structure is built like the seasons. You know, it's embodying the cycles of nature. You spring into summer, the second floor, the heavens, and you literally fall back down to winter, or the night cycle.
Yeah, that's right.
The earth. So it's just amazing how they embody so much knowledge and wisdom, even in all of their structures. You know, we're barely scratching the surface of how much is embedded. But yeah, just so many. And here is Osiris as the Green Man. So
yeah, that's right.
No doubt about it.
Yeah. Yeah, you got some great pictures.
Oh, well, you know, I love this stuff.
Yeah.
But here I'd like to bring up the concept of the wings of Isis and Nebhet, and Isis herself as being not only the veil, but the magnetic field around the earth and around us, you know, that, you know, we have it emanating from all of our chakras, but also, you know, the heart is this large magnetic field. And you can see their wings around Osiris in the lower right-hand corner. And this just jumped out to me years ago. And it just makes sense when you look at all the dynamics of the story.
Yeah.
It's the veil of forgetfulness that we're born into. Take away the magnetic field and, you know, all that galactic radiation or enlightenment, suddenly we're enlightened and we realize we're not our bodies. Maybe.
Yeah, that's right.
And the veil is thinning right now. I mean, if you listen to some of the astrophysicists, and I do take a look at what Ben Davidson's doing fairly regularly, the magnetic field is weakening exponentially in the last 160 years. I think that's huge for where we're at today.
Well, and it's going to affect, you know, it has the potential to affect a lot of things. You know, I mean, on the one hand, it could quicken our spiritual perception, but on the other hand, it could also be a detriment to our technologies. So it's going to be interesting to see how that happens.
Well, radiation does affect our bodies, and it does cause issues with our lungs and with our heart and so many different things, cognitive functions. But on the other hand, I think it's also challenging us to remember that we're not our bodies.
Right. That's right.
And that changes everything. And we are so programmed by our core beliefs. And I think if we were to start shifting and changing and remembering what and who we really are, then that radiation isn't going to affect us quite so much.
Yeah, there's one, at least within the Western mystery tradition, certainly within Templarism and Freemasonry and some other traditions. There's always been a ritual that in which the candidate symbolically goes through a death and raising similar to Osiris. And the belief is that this was something that was passed down, you know, from ancient Egypt, from the priesthoods of ancient Egypt originally. But the value of it is if the ritual is performed correctly, the person will have an out-of-body experience as they go through this. And once the person has that out-of-body experience, then they know that who they are is more than just their body, and that their consciousness survives the body, and that the body is just a cocoon, much as it's depicted when it's mummified, right? It's just a cocoon.
Wrapped in your own wings. Exactly.
Right. And that and who you really are is a consciousness that transcends the physical body. And once you know that, then there's no fear of death, right? Which is what would make you a good leader, because you can make decisions without fear of reprisal, you know.
When I was in college, I started astral projecting. I didn't know what it was, but I gradually got so adept at it. You know, for years I was doing it at will.
Yeah.
Really, totally fascinating what I discovered about myself through those experiences.
Well, and then, you know, of course, then there's no fear of death after that, right? So because who you are is beyond that. So it's, yeah, it kind of the Egyptian traditions all lead us towards that, getting us to that point where we understand who we are, where we're going, and that there's a whole other dimension beyond this, just the physical plane that we're used to living.
Oh, yes.
So,
Patricia, doesn't this ritual sound just like the Hebset festival ritual?
Well, it is. They're emulating everything that we're going to talk about today. They emulate in this Hebset. And, you know, I believe in the very ancient times, the Hebset, now to tell the audience what it is, I know Tim knows,
yeah.
but it was a ritual that was performed by the kings at about the 33rd year of their rulership, their reign.
A jubilee, right?
Right. But the whole concept was that it was at that point that everything fell out of Ma'at. You know, the king was old and tired, right? And everything was out of balance, out of Ma'at, just sort of like the cycles of the earth, you know, that we go through. And the idea was to restore or unite, you know, these aspects. I like to say uniting the two hemispheres of the brain even, because as I have this belief, based on a whole lot of research, that we have moved from a right brain focus to a left brain focus. And the Egyptians were totally immersed in this idea that we needed to harness the two hemispheres of the brain.
Yeah.
And that's the true unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, which the two crowns represent on one level.
Right.
And so that's what I think they were doing during the Hebset. And in the end, you know, the king goes through this process. And I think in the very ancient times, they easily did it. And they, you know, that some of the pyramids and the symbolic tombs, like the southern tomb at Saqqara, was built to for the living kings to go through this near-death experience, in which they, you know, and all the rituals, the oils, and the running the, you know, through the labyrinth, and that reunification, all of that was all geared toward this idea of, you know, connecting the two hemispheres of the brain, having that blissful, you know, moment, that near-death experience where that, you know, you have that moment of feeling you're one with everything that exists in the universe, and you bring that power of God, which is the Neteru, the forces of nature, you bring that down to earth, and you get crowned as a Horus. You know, you are a Horus king. And that's where our whole concept of God sitting on a throne starts, because they're crowned, they sit on the throne, they're crowned, and they're called a god. Today we think all the pharaohs thought they were gods, but no, they you know, if they were to have this experience, and I think in the very ancient times they did, and then they couldn't anymore. They couldn't figure out how to come back, bring them back. And it becomes a symbolic ritual, and they show it on the temples, and they come up with other rituals to prove that they are divine, and the whole concept of the original meaning of it is lost.
Well, we find this in the myth of Osiris as well, because he, in a way, when he's chopped up into several pieces, it represents our perception of seeing everything as separate and you know, and apart from each other, and it's only when it's all brought back into the oneness again, when Isis recollects everything back into the oneness, that, you know, that's the state of our consciousness too, entering into the oneness, where everything is we see the bigger order of how everything goes together, as opposed to being separate and
exactly.
Yeah,
I call it separation consciousness versus unity consciousness.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the same thing. I totally agree with you.
Yeah. Now, what are your thoughts on? You know, of course, in Egypt, they would also talk about how different parts of Osiris were buried at different temples around Egypt. You know, I think at like like Philae, his leg was buried there, or something like that, or and I always kind of interpreted that as kind of the same thing, that like probably in antiquity people would travel to the different temples to gain different knowledge, and as they gained the knowledge at each temple, it was kind of equivalent to like, all right, it's like a merit badge, kind of, you've earned Osiris's you know what I mean? Like, and so the goal was to collect the knowledge from all the different temples and assemble it, and that was then the working Osiris, which was kind of like that was the knowledge that you're potentially gaining. That's how I interpreted it. I don't
just
know
a little aside, that reminds me very much of saints' relics, stashed in cathedrals all over Europe. I never thought about that until now. I always wondered, why would they divide a body up and send a piece here and a piece there? And
right.
Well, let me take that as go ahead, finish.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, by recollecting it, you're also recollecting the wisdom from all those different temples. So that helped you become, the raised Osiris in a way, I would guess. Yeah.
So let me take this a step further, because the original story, he was chopped into 42 pieces, representing the 42 nomes of ancient Egypt, 42 districts. And they went through these rituals, and the entryway at Saqqara was most likely a place. I can't say factually, but I've discussed this with people. I've read white papers where it's been hinted at. But they made, during the Koyak festival every year, the priests of every nome would make little coffins shaped like Osiris or Sokar, and they'd fill it with the silt, the black earth, and they'd plant the seeds of barley, wheat, and corn and make bread cakes. And the king, during his Hebset or other rituals that the priests would do, is you eat the bread cake from each one of these gnomes, and that's the reunification. So this is the first communion.
Yeah, sure.
And the barley, they'd make barley beer or wine. And of course, when the Nile floods and brings that silt, it also turns blood red from the mud and the silt, coming from down from Ethiopia and through Sudan and what have you. But it brings, that muddy, that water turns basically red. And that is the symbolism of the wine or the barley beer that they take now and drink. And so this is the body and the blood of Osiris, and the reunification. So another aspect of the Hebset, but also other rituals that they would perform during their seasonal celebrations.
Yeah, that's great.
Which is a ritual 1 billion Catholics perform every week.
Well, and this is, and Tim said this, the Hebrews, the first, the Old Testament of the Bible happens in Egypt.
Yeah.
And they take this knowing from ancient Egypt. They were Egyptians, and it becomes part of their dogma and their truth. And this, moves into Christianity. And it migrates across, where, people were migrating due to climate and so many different reasons. Out of Egypt, back to Egypt. But this knowledge moves. I mean, India, there's so many connections between Egypt and India, and some of the rituals and the myths and the understandings. So
it's essentially the same culture, just viewed through two different lenses.
Yeah.
Same knowing, inner knowing that develops into maybe different icons, different names, different stories telling the same, meaning the same thing.
Well, and you even have in that regard, you even have some of the same words, that are being emphasized. I think in particularly, like words like Om, Ra, Ma. Mm-hmm. These are things that you find throughout the Egyptian tradition, but you also find it within the Indian. Like Rama.
Right. Forwards and backwards. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Sometimes if you read a language in reverse, it's almost a different language and forward.
Yeah, it's like Siwa, which means brain, and Awas, which means consciousness. It's just the reverse of Siwa in ancient Egyptian, or in Another good one is I lost it. But there's a lot of words in Egyptian, in particular, that they're backwards and forward relationship, or they're tied together somehow. Yeah.
Right. Very often in Arabic, well, modern Arabic, your masculine and feminine adjectives will be the inverse of each other, like Ahmar and Khamra for red, or Aswad and Saudeh for black.
Right.
They're like the mirror image of each other.
Right. Well, one of the ones I was thinking was Ben, Ben, which is as in like Bennu, like the Bennu bird, which is like the phoenix of Egypt. But Ben is also means light or stone. But if you reverse it, it's Neb, which is gold.
Yes.
In Egyptian, so there's some relationships there, alchemically.
So many, even just the tones, like Ka, all over the world, Ka can relate to the same understanding. Sa, Ra, you find, even in Australia, I found a lot of this, and they were pointing it out to me, the original people there. Utterly fascinating. I went into the National Museum in India, in Delhi, and they had a whole room dedicated to this, just these tones and what they mean archetypally. The language of light.
Right. Now, I've often wondered, you got the resurrection of Osiris here. We were talking about the different provinces, associated with different parts of Osiris. I've sometimes wondered if that's a carryover from, I'm very much into the belief that there was a pre-Diluvian civilization that existed in antiquity, that as it collapsed probably, during the Younger Dryas, that they kind of set up shop in Egypt. And so much of what from a Templar, part of what the Templar mission was to they understood that there was this universal flood myths everywhere. And there was a belief that there were certain pockets of survival after the flood, the main one being in Egypt. And so that's part of the reason why the Templars went down into Egypt in the late 1100s, early 1200s, specifically to try to find philosophies and technologies and anything that had survived from that pre-cataclysmic civilization. But the idea was that just like what we find with the different provinces related to different parts of Osiris that had to be recollected, in the same way the Templars were going down there and other places too to try to find the different parts of that previous civilization that had to be recollected. And there's some indication of that a number of places. Certainly all of the the Sphinx and the sphinxes in Egypt in particular. I say sphinxes, because of course there's the Great Sphinx, but then you have the Avenue of the Sphinx, and you find some different sphinxes, but they all seem to be pointing back to this age of Leo, when this time occurred. And at Karnak in particular, we find as you enter Karnak, you have Amun being depicted as a ram, which was during the time of Aries, when those were being created. But they have heads of lambs, but they still have bodies of lions.
Yes.
And it seems to be suggesting that the base origins, went back to Leo, but they were, practicing and creating these these sphinxes during the age of Aries. So of course they would depict the heads as the ram, and then the ram, for Amun, what sound does a ram make? It says ba, which is of course, which is the one of the primary aspects of the soul within the Egyptian tradition that it was calling out to. So
that can move between the worlds.
That can move between the worlds. That's right. So it's exciting stuff.
It is exciting. Wow. I also relate the lions to currency. Most of them are feminine, although there's a couple masculine lions that you see. But the lions become known basically as the kingmakers. And as they're part of the throne, which is interesting, incredibly interesting. But also the alignment of, now Hakim had always said that the Sphinx was Tefnut, and we have Robert Schock and a couple other researchers saying it was Menet. But Menet was also a female lion, and she was sort of like a precursor to Tefnut. It was the same story of the wandering eye, that whole concept. But Tefnut is water. She's the spit. Tef means spit, and Nut, of course, is the womb of the heavens above.
Right.
And so Tefnut is the spit of Nut, and that plays right into Zep Tepi, with the Sphinx being this, this first breath, this spit from the heavens. And we are created as a spitting image, right, of the heavens above.
Right.
It's also fascinating. But I've also done a lot of research into this, the Sphinx basically being in alignment with an ancient magnetic equator, which would have been a powerful line of fertility when we were in a much closer state of balance. When we were in a state of Ma'at, that magnetic equator would have been so powerful. Today, and we're never taught that there is a magnetic equator. We're never taught, and I sort of gleaned this as I used to be in an apartment at the base of the Giza Plateau. And I was on the 5th floor, so I'd get up and have coffee with the Sphinx every morning. And I wanted to know why Hakim said it was Tefnut. And I had saw a meme on Facebook, no less, social media, that said, "Never sleep where a cat sleeps." And so I looked it up. I Googled it. And what came up were all these medical websites that said cats are attracted to these geopathic stress zones where there's underground running water and cavities. And well, basically they were describing the Giza Plateau.
Yeah, sure.
And it all started to come together for me. And the story is Tefnut leaves because Egypt's fallen, a lush and beautiful Egypt has fallen out of Ma'at, fallen out of balance. So she leaves, goes south to Nubia. Well, that's the story of the Ark, one of the stories of the Ark of the Covenant. But it's also, the story of where the magnetic equator is today, which is way down there, totally all over the place. It's not this beautiful line of currency, but that's where it went. And we're in this state of imbalance. But in the story, and you see this depicted in the temples all over Egypt, she basically is persuaded to come back to Egypt and bring the floodwaters with her. And that tells the story of the annual flood, but I think it's a much greater story of this experience. This, you mentioned that, the catastrophic event about, 12,500 years ago, or, thereabouts. This is a cyclical thing. And they point this out in so many different places in Egypt. And so if it's happening every 12,000 years, like so many people believe, this also speaks to a much greater cycle.
Yeah, that's right. It seems to be so much of what is being relayed in Egypt is this idea that we came from the spot, we stabilize things, and we have the potential of going back to that chaos again at some point. And but it's cyclical. It's all based on cyclical things.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, this is a beautiful picture of Osiris here.
Isn't that, again, this is after they cleaned the chambers. It's just
Dendera?
Yeah, this is Dendera again.
Yeah.
I just wanted to show you some of these images because they're so beautiful and you can see them now.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, another one. Now here you have Horus, and basically he does tell Osiris he must turn over and rise. And that's something so many people don't pick up, that this is part of the story, that Osiris is flat on his back, but before he is resurrected, before he resurrects, he has to turn over and rise. And, you know, that has so many implications. Yeah, we need to change our perspective, right? The way we...
It is. And what are your thoughts on Horus being the one to tell him this?
Well, you know, the funny thing about these netters is they're always exchanging places and representing different aspects. You know, and Horus can represent Mars, he can represent Sirius, and he can represent the sun all at the same time.
Yeah.
Didn't use symbolism the way we tend to want everything in a nice little box and put a bow on it and say that's what it is.
Right.
That's not even who we are. You can call me Patricia all day long, but I'm much more than Patricia. And I think, you know, here we're looking at the son telling the father, because, you know, this again is cyclical. It's time to turn over so I can rise, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, because I always look at Horus as kind of like the sequel of Osiris. You know, like he's the child of Osiris, and he comes back to finish the work of Osiris, you know, on some level, you know.
Yeah, and on another level, he's the new sun. So what if the sun has a super flare or a micronova? You know, maybe that's part of the cyclical event. And it's, you know, and then we emerge as something totally different.
Yeah.
A great moment of enlightening. And it's funny because at Edfu in the building text, they actually speak about this snake jumping out of the sun.
Yeah.
And that could very easily be, you know, a super flare or a micronova.
Yeah, coronal mass ejection.
And this
so
can
Patricia,
be a pole reversal as well, with him having to turn over.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's what I was thinking of, the turnover part, like that related to the Earth or to the sun itself. I used to do work at the space labs up in Boulder, Colorado, and we were working on in particular, we were working on it was a top secret project at the time. It's now public. It was known as the Advanced Composition Explorer satellite, and it's a satellite that exists at a point called the L1 point, right between where the gravity of the sun and the gravity of the Earth is equal. So it just stays there in space, and it just monitors the sun 24/7. And part of what we're looking for is, you know, coronal mass ejection, solar flares.
Okay.
But there was also, you know, they tend to come out of the same areas for the most part on the sun, and there's always a speculation of what were to happen if the sun itself were to flip, you know, and what would the result be of that, you know, and so that's what you know, I'm thinking of in terms of those terms, in terms of Osiris turning over, you know.
That is so funny. I've never thought of the sun itself flipping over. Wow.
Yeah, we don't think of the sun as, you know, we think of it as just kind of stable there, like spitting things out here and there, and but it does have its poles, and you know, there are times where it seems to be changing somewhat, but so far it hasn't flipped that we've seen. So,
well, that's good to know.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, how long have we been studying it?
Well, yeah, not too long. So we got to wait. You know, yeah. Of course, the main concern with it was always that Excuse me, hang on just a second. I got my dog let himself in my office. And now he's chewing really loud a snack that he found. Hang on just a second. Come on. Sorry about that.
No.
Yeah, what the main thing we're always looking for with that satellite is solar flares, so that we have an advanced early detection system. Because if it was big enough, it could wipe out all electrical systems on the planet and erase all digital data and really cause havoc for us. And of course, there's some speculation that that's happened in the past, and it has happened to a certain degree. I mean, like there was the Carrington event that happened in the 1800s. If that were to happen today, it would wipe out all information we have stored digitally, all electrical things, including cars and pumps and satellites, and they'd all be wiped out, and we would be back to Little House on the Prairie.
We've been discussing that in the last couple of podcasts.
Yeah.
Is there some sort of fail-safe? Is there some sort of backup?
No, not really. The best we can do is an early warning system, so that we can
not going to help.
Yeah, I mean, just so we can prepare, our military can prepare things to ensure that, like, people didn't start raiding farms and stuff, stealing all the food. They could have some sort of an orderly response to it.
So there are contingency plans.
There are, but it would be. I mean, literally everything that we are used to relying on would be gone. I mean, like pumps that pump water to your house wouldn't work.
No electricity.
No electricity. No transporting of food that are based on grids. And there's some speculation that something like this, as well as mass flooding, occurred during that Younger Dryas time, and the Egyptians were preserving the memory of that to some degree, and we're trying to preserve examples of how life used to be prior to that collapse, and that there's even a theory, which I subscribe to, that even the Valley of the Kings itself was originally just a bunch of survival bunkers, from that cataclysm. They're all connected by tunnels and stuff, and that the pharaohs, the reason why they wanted to be buried there is they wanted to be buried close to where their ancestors came out of that cataclysm, how they survived. That's where they came out of, and all those areas like the Serapeum and everything else they were like storage.
Exactly. I've been saying it was a seed storage device.
Seed storage, exactly. Yeah.
A seed vault like Svalbard.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So all of that was just part of that preservation effort, which of course means they knew it was coming, because they had to have built all that prior to it happening.
Yeah.
And then it was it was all preservation, and so the pharaohs would, what makes more sense, that there was a civilization before that dug all that stuff out, and then they went and survived in it and then came out of there, or that the pharaohs hired thousands and thousands of workers to dig all this stuff out, and then expected them all to keep it secret, because that's where they were going to be buried. I mean, what would be the odds of that? that they would actually keep it secret.
Exactly.
So it was a memory being preserved by the pharaohs, of what was, and you find that incorporated in different ways, on some of the temples themselves. But even in the tombs, some of the tombs there in Egypt, there's depictions of things that certainly weren't happening in Egypt at the time, but were being preserved from previous times, like depictions of baby woolly mammoths on leashes and things of this nature. And the Egyptians didn't know any woolly mammoths, but you find it in some of the tombs, which means they're trying to preserve the memory of what was that had come out of that area. So I think so much of what's in Egypt is pointing to not only the past, the memory of the past, but then also a way to be in harmony with nature going forward, with the hopes that we wouldn't fall under the same cataclysms, or maybe at least that we'd be aware of it so we could prepare for it again for the future.
That's what I think for sure, that they were leaving us all these messages so that we would know when the time came. And that leads me to believe that there is a way to walk through this, kind of like in peace amidst the chaos. And part of that is remembering who we are as interdimensional beings. But,
well, and you find too, I mean, not to take it too off subject, but you do find, if you go to Peru, for example, and in Bolivia, where they have some of the same type of architecture that we find in some of the earliest places in Egypt, they also had these giant tunnel networks, that were like survival bunkers, so we find the same patterns happening on both sides of the Atlantic. But Egypt was clearly the place of preservation.
Well, not only Egypt, you had Turkey that had all these underground cities.
Oh yeah.
There's underground tunnels all over the world. In Australia, I heard about these huge tunnels. One from the southern, the southern part of South Australia, all the way to Uluru. There's a lot that's going on, worldwide that we don't know about. There's tunnels under the United States.
Sure.
Now there's modern ones, but that I've heard tell of, but
like the Denver airport.
Yeah, well, there are tunnels all over Denver, I can tell you.
Yeah.
Living here, so, but most people don't know about them. I've been down in them. Our state patrol uses them to transport around the city when there's big events going on. Most people don't know about that. So.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And they have them in Albuquerque too. So and we all have heard tales of the tunnels.
Yeah.
So, and again, I do think, and the stories, even the Native Americans talk about coming out from underground.
Yeah, sure.
You can breathe the air again.
Yeah. The Hopi in particular talk about a last shaking of the earth where they came out of, and they were put down there by the ant people, and then they came out.
That's right.
After the shaking of the earth, But the Egyptian in particular seems to be, and there's a lot of similarity, by the way, between the Kachina of the Hopi and the some of the neater of the Egyptian.
So many similarities.
Yeah.
I lived in Albuquerque for a long time, and I just love that area. But there are so many similarities worldwide with everything that I've experienced in Egypt.
Yeah. But Egypt seems to be like one of the main centers of preservation of that knowledge. I mean, it's preserved on the temples.
Yeah.
It's the whole, and it's all relative still to us today. I mean, it's not. It may seem foreign at first, or it's obviously a different language for people, but once you start immersing yourself in it and seeing it and feeling it. And this is one of the things I try to stress with people. It's one thing to study Egypt in a book. It's another thing to go there and immerse yourself in the temples and to feel the energy and the and to just be completely immersed in it. It's like you know, it's beyond words.
I was just going to say there are no words. Well, you know, they created those structures. They're living structures.
Yeah.
And even the way it's shaped and all the sacred geometry, I mean, you know, it's frozen music, basically.
Yeah.
But so much within it that is interacting with you, whether you're aware of it or not. Being aware of it makes it a different experience. But it's happening no matter what, and it comes out in your dreams. It comes out in so many different ways.
Yeah, I like to think all those millions of tourists who are passing through there, you know, staring at their phones and not really paying much attention.
I know.
It's having an effect on them nonetheless. They are. I believe it's restructuring the water in their bodies, the very molecules that they're made of. It's fine tuning them back to what a human body should be. These structures still work after all these years. You just have to walk in and plug into it.
That's right. Well, and so like when the Templars went down there, were doing research, you know, particularly in the early 1200s, they tried to bring the knowledge, as much as they could gain at the time, the knowledge of what they were finding in Egypt back to Europe. And so this is why they started building the cathedrals in Europe, because they were trying to mimic the temples of Egypt, and the idea that they were like a human body in the form of the architecture. And then they didn't put hieroglyphs, but they put imagery, you know, iconographic imagery all throughout the cathedral in the same way that they were seeing in Egypt. And they even copied many of the same things, like the images of the young child Horus sitting on the lap of Isis. You know, that they just reproduced that as Mother Mary and the Christ child. You know, but it was all because they were gaining these ideas from Egypt, and they were trying to find a way to replicate it in Europe.
The Black Madonnas were Isis. A lot of them predate Christianity.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Now, I want to know, how did they even know about this to begin with? Because it's been 1,000 years since the collapse of ancient Egypt and the start and the life of Jesus, to the point where the Knights Templar are joining the Crusades to save the artifacts of the ancient world. How did they know what to save? How did they know what to look for? How was
Yeah, there was knowledge passed down through certain Gnostic families. I mean, the Templars were formed through Gnostic families, and these Gnostic families, you know, a lot of the Gnostic tradition has its roots in the Hermetic tradition, and the Hermetic tradition was trying to preserve aspects of ancient Egypt. So, you know, all you have to do is read the Corpus Hermeticum, and it's mentioning, you know, Egyptian leaders in it. But it was, but there were certain family lines, and there were certain places of Gnostic preservation. So one of them was in southern France with the Albigensians, but the Albigensians were also in communion with the Bogomils in Bulgaria, and they were working with the Druze of Lebanon, and the Druze were also in contact with the Sabaeans. The Sabaeans were traveling to Egypt all the time, so that there was a network of these different groups that were out of the fray of traditional Roman Catholicism that was trying to rule things at the time, and they were all working together, and they were all in communication with each other. So when the Templars, for example, the Albigensians referred to themselves as the poor of Christ. So then the Templars, they named themselves the Poor Knights of Christ, because they were really the extension of that. And so they had their own oral histories and rituals, and they were also in communication with Kabbalistic traditions and Troyes, like Rashi of Troyes, who had a huge influence on Saint Bernard, who wrote the rule for the Templars. But they were gaining this knowledge from these different Gnostic groups that were preserving aspects of this Egyptian history and tradition. And I mean, people don't realize that the Egyptians they were traveling a lot further than most people realize in antiquity. In fact, at the place where the very first cathedral was built in France, which is Saint-Germain Cathedral, which isn't too far away from Notre Dame Cathedral. On the earliest maps of Paris, that site is actually highlighted as there originally being a temple of Isis there. So, there was, however it had, whatever that looked like at that time, I don't think it looked exactly like what you find in Egypt, but there was preservation, Egyptian preservation, taking place to a certain degree in France, and the Gnostic traditions were preserving the knowledge of that. And so when the Templars were formed, part of what they were set up to do was to go try to find this stuff and to make sure it didn't fall into the hands of the Crusaders in the region, who wouldn't understand what it was, and that it wouldn't get lost by the Roman Church that was trying to capture everything. So and to the Templars, this is an important part too. The region they were instructed to go to was the Rostau region, which was this area was believed to be between Giza and Saqqara. And of course, in Latin, Rostau, Ros is rose and Tau is cross. Yeah. So this is the real reason why they adopted the rose cross as a symbol, because it was pointing to the Rostau region of Egypt. And this is also why on those cathedrals, if you look at them from the air, they're a cross, but then they put the rose windows in them, which made them rose crosses, right? Which was because they were trying to point to this region of Rostau. They didn't know what Rostau meant in Egyptian, but they knew that name was being passed down by the Coptic Christians and the Sabaeans and some of the other people that were preserving the knowledge of aspects of the knowledge of ancient Egypt that they came in contact with. So they heard Rostau and they were like, oh, well, in Latin that's rose cross, so we'll just adopt the symbol of the rose cross, But it was really that region, that Rostau region, that they were looking for in Egypt. So
basically the place of the first time.
The place of the first time. That's exactly right. Yep. So the Seti.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, Paris, as you were saying that, it reminded me that, it was the place of Isis, Isis.
Yeah, Isis. That's right. Yeah, Notre Dame really was just, Our Lady was really just a recycling of Isis.
Mm-hmm. Well,
because Isis became Sophia within the Gnostic tradition.
Yes. Yep.
And so these Gnostic cultures, that's what they were looking to. And so then they made Notre Dame, Our Lady, who was Sophia, who was Isis.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
and then they replicated that in the United States with the Statue of Liberty.
Yes.
who is, has the 7-pointed crown of Sophia. And holding the torch of light illumination in one hand. But that was really a recycling of Isis, which is why the Statue of Liberty was originally created for the Suez Canal in Egypt.
Yeah, that's right.
And then it ended up, because it was going to be an Isis type of statue, but as Sophia. And then Bertolli, I think that was his name, created the Statue of Liberty. He he gave it to the United States instead. But originally it was created for the Suez Canal in Egypt.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Also, a touch of Seshet. Isis and Seshet are two aspects of the same thing.
Yeah.
And he also represented this wisdom and knowing.
Yeah.
And the seven-pointed
Right.
star crown. Same,
Yeah.
same thing. 7 aspects of self.
Right. And of course, there was Pythagoras who studied in Egypt for, for years and years and years and years. And he, I don't know what they say, like 20 years or something like that. But he coined the term philosophy, which is really just Philosophia, or lover of Sophia, lover of wisdom. But Sophia was, this aspect of Isis. So same story.
Yeah, it always is.
Yeah.
So fascinating.
Well, this is a beautiful imagery.
True. This is from Abydos, of course.
Yeah.
And, yeah, here she is flapping her wings to.
That's right.
Bring that phallus back to life.
That's right.
The resurrection. But, in a way
That's
that
right.
also relates to, if perhaps the earth actually does come back into balance, and some of the scenes I'm going to show in a moment speak to that concept. That is a sort of resurrection. And one of the things I discovered is, you've heard of our North Pole, but we have an ecliptic pole. If the Earth were to come back and point to, where it's supposed to, come up from that 23.5 degrees, it points directly to the Cat's Eye Nebula, that great, wonderful eye, birthing place in the sky.
Oh, wow.
Heavens. And it's wrapped in one of Draco's foils, which I find fascinating. And this pops up in different expressions all over the world. And again, why I think they're so focused on these circumpolar stars and coming back into balance. And that really is almost like the coming together of the two eyes of Horus. It's the sun and the moon. The seasons disappear and we come back into unity, consciousness, oneness, a moment of silence, and then boom, we begin again with the new sun. All possibilities, but they show this over and over again in so many different ways. And I think it was Freddie Silva that he believes that the kite bird, this is Isis as the kite bird, and you can tell because her name is there with the throne. He believes the kite bird was actually Cygnus, and that Cygnus was once alignment with the Osirian, which, we could talk about the Osirian, but we won't do that now. But there's so much that relates that to a possible ancient place where they had
if people come on our tour, we can talk about it there.
Yeah, and that's where they say the head was buried at Abydos, the head of Osiris underneath the Osirian. So there's so many things that you could talk about on so many different levels. Here's another scene, this one from Dendera. And this again is, you couldn't see this imagery before. I always had to look at pen and ink drawings. And it's really just so beautiful. But I have the pen and ink too, so you can see it a little more clearly.
Yeah, that's great.
And I love that what's underneath, that you have Bess, and Bess could represent that moment of silence. But
there's the three figures under the bed. Bess is the one on the far right.
Thank you, Alan. And then you see the two serpents, and it's sort of like the two serpents.
Watch it in Negbet.
Big thank you. The Kundalini energy. And there's Thoth holding the eye of full consciousness.
But he's not a baboon.
No.
He says the ibis.
It's Abbott's bird, wisdom from above.
Usually when he's holding the eye, he's in the form of a baboon.
Except on the ceiling at Esna, and I do have that picture because he's holding it when we're in full consciousness.
Mm.
And I think this again is representing that moment of silence before, Isis brings him back to life again, magically. And that moment of silence, wow, you'll see it. We'll see it again. You see it here with this, again, this is the raising of the Jed pillar.
Yeah.
The moment of silence is spoken here because when you see the Jed and it's perfectly erect, underneath it's on a sled. And that's because it's not moving of its own accord. This is telling us this is a moment of silence, a pause. And you can relate this too. Sekhmet's a great part of this whole story. We talked about solar flares and, she is the fierce rays of the sun.
Right.
And, when Ra thinks she's going to destroy everything, she's bloodthirsty with rage, again, because we've fallen out of Ma'at. And he basically turns the water into wine, the Nile into wine, and she gets drunk and passes out for 3 days. Those 3 days of silence that reflects in our solstices in an annual year. And even during the day at noon and at midnight, we have the perception that the sun stops moving for a few moments.
Right.
And again, so it's funny how they reflect so many of these cycles. But here again, this is famous. It's at Abydos in the Seti I temple. And this is Seti I. All the imagery is him. He actually came from the military. He comes after the whole Akhenaten debacle. a whole podcast in and of itself. But he comes from the military, 19th dynasty, and he has to prove he has the right to rule. So he builds the structure, and the symbolism is all about him performing his Hesed, to prove that, he has brought the power of the Neteru down to earth. So he's assisting Isis to, raise the pillar, which can be the axis of the earth, because it is at 23.5 degrees.
Yeah, that's right.
And what can you say about the Osirian that's right underneath Abydos? And they say that they had to start building off to the different direction because they found the foundations of the Osirian.
Well, the Osirian's below water level, I think it goes down like 50 feet or something. I mean, it goes pretty far down.
10 stories, yeah. Yeah.
I always interpreted the Osirian to me looks like some sort of a processing plant. I mean, it's almost to me. It appears that this is where they were collecting some of the raw materials that they could extract alchemically the essences out of, because there's the water there has a unique quality. I don't think they know exactly where it's coming from, and the we talk about the when we see Isis as a bird on Osiris's phallus that she's created to raise him. When you extract out there's these special salts that you can extract out from that water, and it looks like, even according to some of the Egyptian stuff, it alludes to the seed of Osiris or the semen of Osiris. It's because it looks like semen when you extract it out. It's not semen, obviously. The alchemists called it the seed of nature or the semen of nature for the same reason, because it looks like you know, it looks like it's you know, ejaculation, you know, and but it's really what it is these special salts that they were trying to collect. And I think this is part of what they were baking into the breads to eat. That was really the origin of the communion, and it's because it had tremendous health benefits to it. And I don't know exactly how that would necessarily ties in with the dead pillar, but that we're looking at. But as far as the Osirian goes, I think that's where they were processing a lot of this stuff, and I think they then moved that up into Abydos. There's certain rooms in Abydos where I think some certain chemical properties were taking place there to do these extractions.
Interesting.
Yeah. But I don't, Patricia, anything else you want to say about the Osirian? I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
Well, no, it's quite all right. We don't know what it was used for, and that's an interesting take on it. I have cross sections. I was a member of a team, a Russian team that has gathered together many researchers and are studying the Osirian, and it includes a professor from Middle Egypt, and they've been studying the water. One of the interesting things is way underneath the Osirian, they have what they call ancestral water, and this is water that doesn't move. You know, it's not stream fed. So it's considered by those who study this kind of thing to be incredibly powerful. I know a woman named Maria Wheatley who does a lot of this work in the Avebury, Stonehenge area in the UK. And she speaks about these pockets of water as like being the places where the world's elite want to build their castles, basically, because it's such a powerful dynamic. But not only that, it has several other waters that feed. So, you know, they used to think it was, you know, Nile River water. Well, as you said, they don't really know. But some of the water is coming from the mountains and some is coming from the other direction. And it's funny, one side of the Osirian, they measured the temperature, and it's a different temperature than the other side. But I've seen a floor plan where you see those stairs going down. And if you put a picture of the resurrection scene, there's many papyruses of Osiris on top of a platform with the two stairs going down. And it's, you know, it's almost identical to what you're looking at you know, when you're looking at a cutout of the floor plan of what's going on underneath. So it could have been a place where maybe they were creating substances that they were using, but I think they were using that for some of these ceremonies that they were doing to raise, you know, to move interdimensionally. It's just a feeling I have based on, you know, this is a place of resurrection, this whole idea of resurrection. They did have processions from the old tombs. There was a Second Dynasty tomb, I think it was the tomb of Jet, where they would have processions to the Osirian and perform ceremony. And I think it all had to do with this concept.
Do you think they were bathing in it at all? Like almost like a
mikveh?
Like a mikveh?
Well, it very possibly. Purification. They were doing these ceremonies without a doubt. I love that Seti. I know you know the whole Dorothy story. She used the water for healing and in the village, and from the villagers said it worked.
There could be a natural spring down there too, you know, that it could be coming out of, you know, and that could have been seen as a gift from the underworld or something, you know, that you know, it's hard to know, but
well, ancestral is considered primordial water, you know, in a way. So it's a return to the primordial state of being, pure consciousness.
Yeah.
There's so much research that needs to be done. to fully understand the depth. I think it really, it's powerful.
And Patricia, what's your thoughts on the flower of life carvings on there? You think that was a later thing by some Pythagoreans that came there visiting?
Yeah, that's exactly what I think. It's not laser. It is red ochre drawing. You know, we know people that did climb up, and while I was there, and take a closer look at that. And you know, it was not us, if anybody's listening, but they did take a closer look, and it is just red ochre. And if you have the right stencils, it's not difficult to create a flower of life perfection. I've done it. But yeah, they do pretty much, and Hakeem agreed with this. I think it was the school of Pythagoras that was it was high, and not ancient as people want to believe. But the flower of life does pop up in Egypt. It's so many thoughts on that.
yeah. You find it in Istanbul too, places.
Exactly. And India, and you know, I found it in some of the most obscure places. It is everywhere.
Yeah, I always just assumed it was some of Pythagoras or some of his followers. I mean, he was schooled there, so it would make sense that his followers would come back there too to follow in his footsteps and maybe.
Well, did you hear the story? I heard this story, and I read it somewhere that Pythagoras came to Egypt to learn everything, and he went to the priest, and the priest said, they told him to go to India to learn discipline and then come back and maybe they'd talk to him.
Yeah.
And I always think, and I heard that they did this a lot, that, they wanted people to understand and learn the basics before they would actually sit down and share.
Makes sense.
Makes perfect sense.
Well, and then Pythagoras replicated that too with his own school.
Mm-hmm.
Where he had different levels,
And today we think the Greeks.
Right. Yeah, right.
But and the Romans as well. I mean, so and there you have Greece and Italy covered. So this knowledge spread.
Yeah. So what do you have depicted here? I see you got a duality of consciousness being depicted.
Yeah, I'm showing this again famous image of Thoth holding these two staffs, and it's basically the lotus and papyrus staff. And
they got the different crowns of Egypt on either too.
Exactly. Yeah. And this imagery you see in all the temples, and people tend to miss it. But they're talking about this energy that, it represents so many different things.
Yeah.
But I also, as I said, right and left brain consciousness. And the idea was to bring, you've seen the crowns where they have the cobra coming out.
Yeah.
Headdress. But if you look at the top of the crown, you'll see it doing this sine wave pattern across the two hemispheres of the brain, sort of uniting and connecting them. And I think that's the expression we're looking at, this ability to come back into oneness, unity, consciousness.
Well, and this is this is also the origin of the caduceus that is normally associated with Hermes. But you also find this on the outsides of the doors of most of the temples in Egypt too.
That's right.
You'll see them going up the sides of the doors on either side.
Yeah.
And it's really in a sense, it's the spinal column, and then the energies going up the spinal column to the crown. And
exactly. Well, and here we have it.
Yep. Right.
And of course, Thoth is Hermes.
Right. Exactly.
Yes.
Yep.
In Greek. Exactly.
Right. Mercury in Roman.
Yeah. That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Gets around.
Yeah.
And here's another image. Here's, Horus being the outcome of the whole resurrection.
Yeah.
And these big squares, these boxes, I've come to realize are known as birthing boxes. When you see them on these boxes, these are expressing the potentials of new cycles, new life, new new beginnings.
Is that a lion on top of there?
That is a lion, and they have several of these depictions.
That's great.
And it's again having to do with the fertility of the moment, and then she gives birth to Horus. But this, I just love the fact that they clean these images. I'm fortunate to be able to go to these temples as often as I do. So, and here's, as we talked about, the other aspect. Here we see, and this is at Abydos, and it's on the wall. It's on the other wall, to the other side. Like if you turn around, you'll see these images of Horus wearing the double crown, and here he is on the papyrus pillar, much like you see him on the ceiling at Dendera. And it's basically giving birth to divinity. It's moving into that next stage of consciousness.
Yeah. It's great.
And it's also, strangely, in the building text at Edfu, they talk about, when the floodwaters recede, then you find the bird flying to sit on the papyrus or the reed, and I relate that a little bit to the Noah story, the Noah's Ark.
Completely.
As well as this idea of Horus in that moment of silence, of complete, divine consciousnthis.
Well, and then again, from an alchemical standpoint, even in the Noah story, you still see the same 3 levels of extraction, because you have the earth is obsessed with its physical senses. Along comes a flood. That's water and digestion.
Right.
Then Noah lets birds go into the air, and that's distillation, and that's where you gain knowledge. Right, and then he lands on Mount Ararat and makes a burnt sacrifice to God, which is the fire, the calcination part. So it's the same progression that we find in the story of Osiris, and that corresponds to these main alchemical operations. And it seems to be a knowledge from antiquity, from that primordial time, that was passed down and being preserved in different ways and different myths, but alluding to the same ideas. So yeah. Beautiful. Yeah.
And this is from Edfu, and here again you see the lions, and they call this is Horus in both. He's in human form with the hawk head, with the double crown, sitting on the throne. And in the other image, as the bird sitting on what they call the royal birth couch. Fascinating.
Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, and again, I'll also relate this to the Ark of the Covenant. This whole concept, how powerful this moment is.
Sure.
And we talked about this, these kings that have performed these rituals, even if it's just symbolic. Now, this is Ramses from the Luxor temple, but that temple is to show the divinity of the king, portray this, as well as everything that Schwaller de Lubitz tells us about being patterned after man, the body of man.
Right.
And so much more. But this whole idea, that here he is sitting in his power, on the throne in this moment of silence, it's just very powerful.
Now, what's your thoughts on, I've heard it said that there's some people believe that, particularly at the Ramseum, where there's, these giant statues of said to be of Ramses, but there's some people that theorize that those statues could have been actually much older.
Oh, absolutely.
That Ramses just put his name on them.
He put his name on it, and again, it wasn't him; it was the priests.
Right. Right.
He's a figurehead. The power behind the throne was the priesthood, especially after the age of Taurus. We move, we fall completely into form, and this is when the priests of Amun begin to take control.
Right.
And this is why Akhenaten fled.
Right.
He was brought up as a priest. He studied to be a priest, and then his older brother dies, and he's like, deer in the headlights.
Right.
And it wasn't going to let the priest corrupt what he knew to be true.
Right.
And so, yeah, no, absolutely. Ramses had his name on everything. I think I saw his name on a female statue once. If that's anything. But yeah, no. And that has to do with Aries. You pointed that out. You know, Ramses, the names, you know, all the Ramses kings, you know, they are, you know, Aries says, I am. And, you know, Ramses said, I am everywhere. I did this. I built this. I am this.
Right.
So, without a doubt. You know, the hidden meaning is they were staying in line with, you know, the dynamic of the age that they were in.
Sure.
Which is fascinating in and of itself.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I know there's even talk of, you know, there were certain temples that were disassembled and then reassembled to be more in line with the age that they were living in at the time, you know, the Aries age. And
definitely. Yeah, underneath Karnak is a temple dedicated to the bull. And they literally had to move everything because, of course, the alignments were off.
Correct.
So there's temples below temples below temples at every step.
And we find a lot of foundation stones are actually blocks from other temples that have been turned upside down, placed in the ground like a seed.
Yep, the keystone, seed stones, for sure.
Yeah, amazing.
That is amazing. So I can't get enough of this dynamic.
I know.
But there's again Osiris and Horus rather in his shrine on the sled. And, you know, Sokar represents that moment. He's also in a shrine on that side of the wall at the Seti I temple, and Sokar is that moment of silence. I wish I had brought. There is the picture when you see him being pulled on the boat, and he looks like this pregnant blob, you know, with something in his pouch. Oh gosh.
Oh yeah. I think
you know what
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, in a way, it represents winter solstice, but it also represents that moment of silence, probably where we get the word sacred, Sokar, sacred.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. That's Sakara too. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
The place of Sokar, for sure.
Yeah.
And here's the Cat's Eye Nebula. I just think it's fascinating that we would point to this amazing place in the sky.
Yeah.
In that moment.
Wow.
And this is the you know, after you see the raising of the Jed, you get to this end. You see the Bennu bird that you mentioned, which is that regional. But here you see the head of Osiris. It's the fetish of Osiris on the pole, which we also see in the barks. And this is shown all over Egypt. And I just find it, you know, almost like you have this erect pillar pointed to maybe the ecliptic pole, and underneath, you've heard of the churning of the milk scenes? Yeah. This reminds me of this understanding of how, you know, things are moving in dual directions in the circumpolar stars in the heavens.
Yeah.
And there it is at Dendera.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Right.
Same concept.
Now, what are your thoughts of oftentimes, they'd have those boats, you know, even on the sled with, within like, and then like the inner sanctum, you know, box usually where they would keep one of the arks. You know, on that sled, you know, on that boat too. And it's, I don't know if they're just trying to depict, you know, that it had traveled from elsewhere and was brought in to Egypt, or what. That part I don't understand, but it's depicted all over the place.
Well, I think, you know, like the one I'm showing now, this is in the entryway as you go back to that big Osiris room at Abydos. And there's one on one side. I'll have the picture of the one on the boat on the other side. But here, you know, you can see it's on the sled, it's on a box, it's not moving. And yeah, I agree with you. This is an Ark of the Covenant.
Right.
Yeah, this is representing this powerful, powerful device.
Right.
It's holding the head or fetish of Osiris.
Yeah.
So it's representing that moment of stillness in such a way. It's you know, they're celebrating it.
Right.
And of course, that's the moment when, you know, we see the images at Edfu, but where Horus kills Set. Set is chaos. You know, he stops the chaos. And in a way, you know, I think it's funny that, well, it's too much to include now, but Set is in the form of the hippo, which is sort of like Taret or Epet, who is in circumpolar stars, as this whole expression of the Big and Little Dipper. Is he stopping the spin when he kills Set, that being the chaos?
Right.
It all sort of comes together. And Set is basically spirit set in form.
Yeah.
And he wants out, as we all do. He is divinity locked in three-dimensional physical perception of reality.
Right. Well.
You don't have to say right, but if you,
no, it's just I'm following you with it.
It all sort of makes sense to me.
You know, that head of Osiris too. It reminds me of, you know, anytime you have the head, it's kind of like the main point of consciousness contact, you know, on some level. And in alchemy, of course, one of the first stages is you create something known as the caput mortem, which means the dead head. Is literally what it means.
Wow!
But it's the first digested nature that you needed to extract things out of, and there's even a correlation there with John the Baptist, and how he baptizes like a priest king, and then he gets his head cut off, you know, and it's he does the baptism by water, and then he gets his head cut off in the same way that in alchemy, you know, you do this digestion, which was considered a baptism by water, and then you get the caput mortem, or the dead head. But out of that dead head is what you're extracting all the essences out of. And so,
wow,
you know, I don't know if that it has some similar resonance with what we're seeing with the head of Osiris, but it's almost like the head of Osiris is being held up as like a totem, you know.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
This whole image has always fascinated me. Yeah. And yeah, that you point out that this is just that moment of pure consciousness, primordial.
Right. Right.
It's beautiful. And then, of course, this is on the other wall, right, you know, opposing it. And also that beautiful shrine with the, I call it the exploding cobras.
Nice.
But they're, again, when they have that, they're saying this is a sacred space. It is a divine space. And you have this Neshmet bark. And again, you see this in all the temples, but not nearly as beautiful as this.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And there is the head of Osiris again. And yeah, I again, this is an Ark of the Covenant without a doubt.
Right.
Powerful moment of potentiality. And back to Dendera, but you know, this expression of the winged Kepler beetle is also a powerful imagery of the new beginning. the new day cycle.
And you find that under that big arch as you're going into the Temple of Hathor there at Dendera.
Yep. Hakeem said it meant you're entering a place that answers all the secrets of the universe, all the mysteries of the universe.
Yeah.
When you see the underbelly of the scarab as you look up.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. Now it's interesting, those flying scarab beetles, that's also been pointed out that their body mass is too large for their wingspan. And so they really shouldn't be able to fly. But they're kind of like, it's almost like
some sort of
an
levitation.
illusion to levitation of some kind. Yeah, that's going on there too.
Well, there's that Russian scientist who said that they had the ability to hover through electromagnetism.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know how real that was. I remember seeing
Yeah,
video.
I don't know either, but it's interesting.
But fascinating. Well, look how bees use, the queen bee uses electromagnetism to, control, keep order with all the worker bees.
Right.
They harness the forces of nature. And, we have that ability. We just lost the senses that
Right.
those forces, And then I point this out because it's also, this is also the harvest, Horus.
Yeah, that's right.
It's also talking about, planting the seed and nurturing the seed, and so that you have this great harvest, which is what that moment was all about.
Right.
And then you reseed.
Right.
The earth.
Yeah.
And here you go, Alan. The name of Osiris with the eye. To me, it's just so beautiful. But it also points out, this name translates as the seat of the eye or the place of the eye. So, he is the green man. He's agriculture. He's us. He's the earth. But he's also our consciousness.
Yeah, that's right.
On this journey.
The pineal gland, the seat of consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The throne. Interesting.
And Isis is that throne, and this is the masculine and feminine moving on this journey together. This is at some point we have to. Have you been to Esna?
I have, yeah. Yeah, they've just been cleaning it all up. It's beautiful there. Yeah.
I love this temple, and this I couldn't believe it when they finally cleaned this image. To me, this image speaks to everything we've been talking about, because you see, how the eye, the different fractions of the eye represent the stages of the moon. 14 stages waxing and 14, waning, and 14 stages waxing into fullness. I have another image here that actually shows Thoth. Here he is with the eye as this full moon expression of consciousness.
Oh, yeah.
And I just find it absolutely incredible. It literally is telling the story we just talked about. It's the resurrection of consciousness itself. And there's Osiris. You have him here all the way over there, wrapped in his own wings when we are in that, just after that new moon stage.
Right. Yeah, it's a beautiful image.
And then Hakeem, he always used to say,
yeah.
He made us say, Yakini, Yakini. And he said, may you be protected by the power of your positive essence.
So I only got to meet Hakeem once, and that was in 2011 when I was there in late October, early November 2011.
Had to be before then, because he passed in 2008.
2008?
Yeah.
Well, maybe it was before. Maybe it was before. Maybe I'm thinking of that. I'm thinking of that earlier trip. Yeah. So it would have been. It was 2007. Then it would have been.
There you go.
Last time I saw him. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw him in 2007. I met him in 2005. That was my first trip. And then I went back in 2007. We had a reunion tour at my suggestion. He actually came out of retirement and came on the whole journey with us.
Oh,
And
that's
then
amazing.
it was amazing. It was absolutely incredible because we would see, the keepers. He hadn't been at these structures, in Upper Egypt for years, and the keepers would come out of the sites with tears in their eyes, and he would have tears in his eyes, and the love that they had for him was just so huge, and the love he had for each and every site was incredible.
Oh, that's
But
great.
that's a legacy of knowledge. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard when you have somebody like that who's preserved so much knowledge, and
Yeah.
then when they pass through transition, it's like a huge loss to humanity.
Well, because I didn't get to ask all the questions that I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate. I am blessed to have spent as much time with him as I did. I did go back again, and he invited me to stay for almost 2 weeks. And I stayed at like one of the relatives had a bed and breakfast in the village. So wasn't much to speak of, but I was so happy to be there. I was in bliss.
Yeah.
Waking up with the Sphinx and then walking over to the house. He'd always be sitting outside in front of the house having his coffee, and we would just sit there and talk. And he was just an incredible man. So
Well, this has been a great podcast. I think it's just a fraction of what we'll cover on the trip itself, on the tour. If people want to go on the tour, yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty incredible group. We already have quite a few people signed up for it. I know there's more that are signing up.
Yes, there's lots of inquiries. We have a wonderful group forming, great people, and they're all excited, as am I. But there's still, obviously, there's time to sign on, and you do want to reserve your space because the hotels can fill up quickly, and we want you want to make sure you can be with us. But it's going to be. It's going to be great. I'm really excited, Tim, especially after this time talking with you. There's so many aspects that I hadn't thought about before.
Well, it's great, and I think as people go on the tour, it's one of the beautiful things about our tour that we're going to do is we are bringing this true knowledge of the mysteries of what people are being seen. I mean, a lot of people can just go on a tour to Egypt where they're going to get a general, a really general interpretation of what they're seeing, and they're not really going to, they're just going to see the sights without really getting the soul or the spirit behind them. And I think what we're trying to do is really introduce people to the soul of these sites and to the real meaning that's at least some of it, what's going on there. I mean, you could spend your entire life in one of the temples and probably still not get it all, but we could at least give you so much more than you're going to get from a normal tour. And so I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, beautifully said. You're absolutely right. And the beauty of coming with people of like mind, where what I find with these groups when they come is they see sides of Egypt that we sometimes don't see. Even when younger children come, I'm always amazed at what they run around and point out. Things that we may not be looking at with our eyes suddenly come forward. But people bring their perspectives and their views, and we have a lot of aha moments just with the members of our groups. And every group creates their own magic. The doors get unlocked that normally aren't unlocked. It's funny how just some small thing happens, and we get to experience something that you don't usually get to experience. So
Yeah, it's almost like you're entering into Wonderland, you know, from like Alice in Wonderland through the Looking Glass. I mean, you're going into a new world where you're just being bombarded with things that are speaking to you in ways that you don't normally have things speak to you. and you come out of it, you know, with it stays with you for the rest of your life. It impregnates in your consciousness, and I just can't, you know, speak. You know, it's something that every person should do at some point in their life, in my opinion. Is at least go and experience some of what's there, and it's not just the learning of the ancient Egyptian mythologies, but it's also just the feelings you get while you're there. I mean, these temples were built to be transformative, and on many different levels. And having experienced them, you come out of them a new person. So it's very exciting.
That better. You're absolutely right. And I'll just quickly say that after we had a group that was here last January where we had a Zoom meeting 2 months later, and they all said exactly that they came home with just all this new way of looking at everything, and they couldn't even communicate with their friends and families for several weeks because it was just they didn't have the words to describe what it was.
Yeah. I usually try to warn people that, you know, usually the last day of the tour, like, you know, now you're going to be going home and you're going to have had all these incredible experiences and seen all these things that shouldn't exist. And you're not going to know how to really talk about it with the people back home who are living their mundane lives. So, you know, stay in contact with each other so that you can have a network to discuss these things.
Well, you know, we do create a Telegram group where we can communicate during the tour, share photographs, and even let people know that, oh, you know, we're going to sleep in an extra 20 minutes. But we start it for that reason, and then they keep it going. And they tend to meet up at different places in the world. It's really, you're absolutely right. Those connections sometimes last a lifetime as well.
Yeah, that's right. It's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, I appreciate this opportunity to talk with both of you today. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.